Produced by Malik.
What is going on, world? Welcome back to Malik's Water Garden. In today's video, we're going to be briefly looking at how to take care of Asian discus fish. Now, what are the difference between the Asian discus and the wild-caught discus and the European discus? The main difference is that they are incompatibility with each other, and this is mainly due to bacterial incompatibilities and other pathogenic incompatibilities. So, these fish have been bred in Asia for several decades now, and they are susceptible to some diseases, but they also are immune to some other diseases and pathogens. Same thing applies to the fish that are bred in Europe. So if you were to bring fish from Europe and then you have Asian discus or vice versa, you cannot mix them together right away. You want to quarantine both species of fish separately and then use a test fish from each tank into the quarantine tanks to see what type of effects the other fish might have, or the bacterial stuff that the other fish has on the incoming fish. And then once you are satisfied that the incoming fish do not have any pathogens that can transmit to your existing colony or vice versa, then you can actually mix them together. This is a lengthy process. It's quite explained in several different textbooks and forums and stuff, and this is something that many big discus breeders do. So I mean, it's essentially how this is done. Now, in this video, we're going to be looking at just basic care and maintenance for these particular strains that come from Asia. There's a really good video online about how to take care of wild-caught discus by Rebecca Bentley. She's in the United Kingdom. She's an ichthyologist, and I'll put a link to her channel up here and that video so you guys can check it out and learn more about wild-caught discus and how to take care of those. We're going to be looking at Asian fish that are bred in Asian farms that are kept outside or grown outside in normal tropical weather. So these guys can actually tolerate normal tropical temperatures. They don't need to be kept at 86 degrees, 87 degrees all year round. These guys I actually keep mine here at 82 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. Sometimes the temperature in the summer goes up to about 84 degrees Fahrenheit, and sometimes in the winter the temperature goes down to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't let it go down a lot below 80 degrees Fahrenheit and for not too long, and I don't let it get above 87, 84, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and also not for too long. So essentially they live between 80 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and that seems to be an optimal temperature range for these Asian bred discus. They also seem to breed quite well in that temperature range, and if the temperature goes up above 84, 85 degrees, they stop breeding, and the temperature drops below 79 degrees, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they also stop breeding. So that's essentially where their comfort zone lies for this particular types of discus, and that's where I like to keep mine. And I've done this for several decades now myself. I've been keeping discus, and this is where I've learned to keep them, and this works for me personally. Some of you might have different experiences, because the last few times I made videos about this temperature issue, a lot of people were really upset because they kept their tanks a lot warmer and their fish kept dying, but they were like, how are your fish not dying at such a cold temperature? So essentially I'm just gonna say that the warmer the temperature is, the faster the fish's metabolism, and the faster the fish will wear out its internal organs and stuff, and the faster the fish can die. So this is something to pay attention to, and just keeping them at a comfortable 82 degrees Fahrenheit seems to be good for the fish, and also long term for you, because your fish would less likely die because of some issue, and you don't have to go back out and buy like an expensive fish to replace the dead fish. So that's what I'm going to say with the temperature aspect of things. I keep mine in tap water, 7.4 pH, TDS about 160 parts per million, and they do breed in this water quite regularly, and they can hatch some fry in this water. But if you want to get large fry hatch rates, you do have to bring the TDS a little bit lower than 160 parts per million. It seems to be at about 130, 140 parts per million of hardness, at least in my understanding here in Toronto and Ontario in general. You get very large hatch rates, like almost 90-95% survival or hatch rates. The eggs develop much better, and this seems to be where the sweet spot is for this particular species. They do also breed in lower acidic water, and if the pH is at about 6.97, that also seems to increase the hatch rate. So that's where you want to keep the pH and the TDS if you want to breed them. But for regular everyday maintenance, you want to keep them at about 7 to 7.5 6.5 is fine. Anything below 6.5 I wouldn't recommend long term, especially for these Asian strains, because they're not used to living in really acidic water. The same thing applies on the top end. You don't want to keep them anything above 8.0 pH, just because they're not designed to live in that type of pH ranges. It's just not good for the fish for long term. You can get away with it for a few months, even a year or two, but if you want to keep the animal alive long term, 5 years plus, even longer, then you want to give them that ideal pH range of neutral, and good stable pH is better than a pH that fluctuates every single day or every single week. So keep them in your tap water pH as long as it's between 6.5 and 7.5. Now the next thing I'm going to say is feeding wise, you want to feed them a high quality diet. I feed these guys a variety of foods. Their favorite food unfortunately seems to be tetratropical colored granules. McDonald's for fish. Not the most healthiest food, but honestly, she stopped eating last year, in the beginning of this year, at a point when I moved her. She was not happy with the move because I was trying to get her to spawn, and I moved her into a tank by herself. These guys are very picky. They like this tank. They breed in this tank. I try to get them to breed in other tanks. They don't lay eggs in the other tanks. 6 months I kept them in the other tank. They didn't breed by themselves. I moved them to this tank. They've laid like 5 or 6 clutches of eggs since I moved them in the last 4 months. And it's pointless because the plecos eat the eggs. But anyways, this is their favorite food. Unfortunately, these guys love this food. I also feed them Sarah Discus Gran. This is really good food. Everyday feed. These two I kind of mix every other day type of deal. I also feed them Nutrifin bug bites and a variety of other types of soft gel foods. Artemia Pro Soft by Ebo, they get some of that. They get Dr. Basilears. They get a variety of food. Essentially, I try to feed them things that have 50% or more protein content and 5% or less fat content, as much as possible, which is why I like feeding some of the Dr. Basilear and stuff, and has less fat, I believe. And then the next thing is, I would say, you want to give them regular feedings, little bits of food as many times as possible. So if you see the animal, the mouth is there, the anal cavity or the opening, the ventral area is here. This is how big the stomach area is for this fish. Although the fish is this big, the stomach area is very small. So they cannot hold a lot of food, especially for younger fish, and they need to eat regularly. They're grazing animals, so this is where a lot of people will have a hard time keeping them alive long term. You might not notice your animal wasting away for the first like 6 months because it's only eating a little bit, it's maintaining its weight or losing a little bit of weight, 1 gram or 2 a week, and you're not noticing it. Eventually, when you do notice, the animal is basically a skeleton with skin on it, and at that point it's very, very hard to get them back to normal health. But you can actually bring Discus from very, very detrimental states back into health. It's just not advisable. So what I recommend is to feed your fish several times a day. Auto feeder is a really good option. Get an auto feeder that can be programmed for about 4 or 5 times a day. Add the really high quality food into the auto feeder, like a baseline food like your tetratropical color granules or your Discus Gran, and have it drop very small amounts of food 4 to 5 times a day into a specific area where the Discus know there's always going to be food, so that the Discus are target fed by the auto feeder. That's, I think, you cannot go wrong once you do that one trick. But also make sure if you have plecos and stuff, you're not overfeeding the rest of your fish. Secondarily, throughout the day, so your regular feeding times, the 2 times you actually do feed your fish tank, then also target feed your Discus at those times. So this is the way to keep your Discus healthy long term. They do better when you can feed them at least 3 to 4 times a day in smaller amounts. If you're only feeding them twice a day, then you'd have to feed a lot more, and it can be done. I mean, I work full time, and when I am at work, I feed these guys twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, and I feed a little heavy. But the downside to that is then my plecos will eat a lot more of this high nutritious, high caloric food that then they can digest, and then that could be detrimental to them. So that's something to pay attention to, what other types of fish you keep in the fish tank. They do great with Ultima Angels, they do great with regular angels, they do great with plecos, they do great with larger tetras. Smaller tetras will be looked at as food, so anything that the Discus can't fit in its mouth can be looked at as food, but anything bigger than what the fish can fit in its mouth, they leave them alone. Very peaceful animals, they get along quite well with most of the animals. I've kept them with Geophagus redhead tapajos. I've kept them with Ultim Angels. Obviously, you can see they're in the tank with an Ultim Angel. I've kept them with my Zebra Placos. I've kept them. I'm actually right now they're in with my L134 group and my Hype Ancestral Porto de Mas group. I've kept them with larger tetras. I've kept them with Pseudohemida napitanos. I've kept them with pretty much all the fish in my fish room. Can live with them as long as they cannot fit the fish into their mouths. Okay, so that's what I'm going to leave you with. They are very good fish to have. Planted tanks are ideal. Planted discus tanks cannot be kept at 86, 87 degrees Fahrenheit, so you want to keep the temperature low, and that's another thing to pay attention to. So like if you are seeing discus in planted tanks and stuff, the tank temperature is usually about 82, 83 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, or somewhere around there. So that's how they do that. So if you are wondering, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a question. That's how people can keep plants and discus in the same tank. Companion animals wise, I mean obviously I named a whole bunch. If you are keeping animals that cannot tolerate the high temperatures, try to figure out the temperature ranges and play with it a little bit, where you can keep the discus at, like, let's say 82, 83 degrees, and keep other fish that can live in that temperature. Or if you're just going to keep the discus in your own tank, then you can keep the tank at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's fine. If you're going to keep Zebra Placos in the tank with your discus, then also 85 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit is fine. But you know, just figure out what you want to do in that aspect, and that's what I'm going to leave you with. So there's a lot of options, a lot of variations that you can play with here, and they are amazing fish that live for very long lives, and they can give you a lot of joy and enjoyment as long as you cover the basics. And if you do these particular things, you can keep your discus alive for more than 5 years and potentially even longer. That's my goal making these videos. I want you guys to stop going, keep repeating visits to the pet store to keep replacing fish that end up dying in a few days or a few weeks or a few months or even a year. These animals are not meant to die in 1 year or 2 years. They're meant to live for very long lives. So hopefully this helps you guys to keep your discus alive for a very long time to come. As always, thank you so much for your love and support. I'll see you on the next video. I love you all. God bless you.